Recognize Representative Hageman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am grateful for the opportunity to be here today, and it's an honor and privilege to discuss the future of state management of grizzly bears and other species with Mr. Brian Nesvik, whose expertise we deeply value in Wyoming. I'm also proud to represent the citizens of Wyoming who have borne the brunt of the direct effects of the ESA regulations through the dangerous personal encounters with grizzly bears or through the destruction of property and their livestock. My legislation, the Grizzly Bear State Management Act, H.R. 1245, would remove the greater Yellowstone ecosystem population of grizzly bears from the federal list of endangered and threatened wildlife, allowing Wyoming game officials to implement our own state management plan that will benefit Wyoming landowners, businesses, outdoorsmen and women, hunters, tourists, and the grizzlies themselves. The grizzly bear population in Wyoming is more than fully recovered and continuing to increase. The most recent estimate of the number of grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is more than 1,000 strong. This tremendously exceeds the recovery goals of 500 bears, meaning the management of the species should be returned to the state pursuant to the Endangered Species Act. Not only have they recovered far beyond the needed threshold, but they've expanded their range beyond what is considered suitable by the Fish and Wildlife Service itself, now covering over 25,000 square miles. We value the presence of these animals in our state and have not only the ability to keep the grizzly population strong and manageable, but the expertise that is second to none. Managing Wyoming's grizzly population is more effective to do at a local level, as is all species management. Grizzlies can and should be managed by state wildlife agencies rather than the federal government. Not only are state agencies better equipped to manage these populations, but they tend to have a better understanding of local conditions and can successfully tailor management strategies to fit the needs of the state and balance all of the competing interests. It's unfortunate that we even need to consider my legislation here today, but we've learned not to trust the courts to follow the Endangered Species Act. Grizzly bears were first listed in 1975 after populations had dropped dramatically. But by 2005, grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem reached 600 in number, surpassing the threshold of what is required to be a recovered species. What a success story. We ought to build on that. Because of the recovery, the Fish and Wildlife Service proposed that the bears be removed from the endangered species protections, but radical environmental groups were quick to file suit. To our dismay, the grizzlies were relisted by the courts in 2009. No one was surprised when grizzly bear conflicts thereafter increased, with dramatic and devastating impacts on our ranching communities in Wyoming and Montana shortly thereafter. In 2017, Interior Secretary Zinke announced the Fish and Wildlife Service would again delist the greater Yellowstone grizzly. It was estimated at that time that over 700 bears existed in the ecosystem with an expanded range of habitat. Even with tremendously exceeding the threshold of recovery and increasing threats to rural and agricultural communities, the Yellowstone grizzly was returned to the endangered species list through the coordination of environmental groups and activist judges. Now, my colleagues on the other side often talk about the number of a particular species or animal that may have been killed. But that point misses the most important factor to assess under the Endangered Species Act, which is the number of live animals that exist in a particular ecosystem. It's not about the number that may have been taken pursuant to appropriate take permits or pursuant to appropriate management. It's the number of live animals. So while the Democrats want to focus on death, that isn't even a factor to be considered under the Endangered Species Act. We on this side, however, we care about life and we care about the living species, and so does the Endangered Species Act. The governors of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana have petitioned to delist the grizzly bear because the data shows that it is warranted as per the Endangered Species Act itself. Meanwhile, environmental litigants have been holding farmers, ranchers, and the government hostage to their demands and for the purpose of protecting their own pocketbooks. Wyoming is done with waiting on the federal government when the science has said for a long time that it's time to act. This bill will act as a legislative backstop to prevent going through this unnecessary litigation again. Chairman Benz, I would also like to request unanimous consent to enter 2 letters from Wyoming supporting the effort to delist the greater Yellowstone ecosystem population of grizzly bears, one from the Gun Owners of America and the other one from Governor Mark Gordon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you. I now recognize Representative Bonamici for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Benz, Ranking Member Huffman, and members of the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries for holding this hearing. I'm here to testify in favor of H.R. 886 to amend the bipartisan Save Our Seas 2.0 Act.